Tom's weathered hands trembled as he stared at the credit card statement, the black numbers blurring through his tears. 42 years of marriage, and now this. Withdrawals for jewelry he'd never seen. Hotel charges for nights Evelyn was supposedly with her sister. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner of their craftsman home, each sound echoing in the sudden emptiness. The scent of pine from his workshop mingled with cooling coffee as a tear splashed onto the paper, smudging Evelyn's deception. Have you ever discovered a betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Share your story below, like if this moment resonates with your own experience, and follow to see how Tom finds strength when his world collapses. He glanced at the wedding photo on the mantel. Younger faces, genuine smiles, hands intertwined, before gently setting down the statement. His woodworker's fingers, calloused from decades of craftsmanship, now struggled to hold this paper that threatened everything he'd built. Outside, Evelyn's car pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the walls like searchlights exposing his new reality. Tom eased into his favorite chair, the one he'd crafted from walnut 30 years ago when his hands were steadier and his world more certain. The evening light filtered through lace curtains Evelyn's mother had crocheted, casting long shadows across the oak table he'd built for their 25th anniversary. His fingers, calloused from decades in the woodshop, trembled slightly as he sorted through the day's mail. Bills, advertisements, and then something that didn't belong, a credit card statement he'd never seen before. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, marking seconds that suddenly felt heavier. Tom's brow furrowed as his eyes caught unfamiliar transactions, large withdrawals, jewelry purchases, hotel charges in towns where Evelyn claimed to attend her book club. His throat tightened as dates aligned with her errands and sister visits. "Can't be right," he whispered, voice catching on the final word. The scent of pine shavings still clung to his flannel shirt, mixing with the cooling coffee Evelyn had left before her meeting. A memory surfaced. Their 40th anniversary dinner, Evelyn's distracted glances at her phone, the way she'd declined his offer to make her a jewelry box. "Got enough trinkets," she'd said. The first tear fell silently, landing on the statement and blurring a hotel charge from last month. Tom's weathered hand reached for the wedding photo on the side table, thumb tracing the younger faces, smiling with genuine hope. His chest constricted with a pain sharper than when he'd broken 3 ribs falling from old man Henderson's roof 20 years back. "All this time?" he murmured to the empty room, shoulders beginning to shake. The house creaked around him, familiar sounds that had once meant home now hollow in his ears. A second tear followed, then a third, until he couldn't count them anymore. Tom had rebuilt engines that mechanics half his age had abandoned. He'd taught woodworking to troubled teens, showing them how to find beauty in grain patterns others overlooked. He'd raised 2 children and spoiled 5 grandchildren with handcrafted toys. But in this moment, he felt every one of his 65 years pressing down on his shoulders. His thumb smudged a tear on the paper, revealing something odd. The statement address had been altered. Years of precision woodworking had taught his eyes to catch the smallest imperfections. Tom sat straighter, wiping his cheeks with the back of his hand. The woodworker's eye that could detect a 1-degree angle discrepancy now focused on what appeared to be deliberate deception. A soft knock at the front door startled him from his thoughts. Tom quickly tucked the statement into his workshop journal, heart pounding with uncertainty. Friend or foe on his porch? He rose unsteadily, steps faltering toward the sound as the sun disappeared completely below the horizon. Tom steadied himself against the doorframe, drawing a deep breath before opening the front door. The neighborhood association president stood on his porch, clipboard in hand, talking about the upcoming block party. Tom nodded mechanically, his thoughts circling back to the statement hidden in his workshop journal. "You all right, Tom?" Looking a bit peaked, Mrs. Holloway said, peering over her reading glasses. "Just tired is all," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Spent too long bent over the lathe today. After she left, Tom closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly aware of the silence in the house. The kitchen light flicked on. Evelyn was home. He composed himself, tucking the pain behind a woodworker's mask of patience, and moved toward the light. Evelyn bustled about, unpacking shopping bags from stores Tom didn't recognize. Her perfume seemed stronger tonight, unfamiliar, as though she'd refreshed it before coming home. His eyes caught the glint of something new on her wrist. "That's a mighty fine bracelet," he remarked, settling into a kitchen chair that creaked under his weight. "Don't recall seeing it before." Evelyn's hand instinctively covered the bracelet. "Oh, this old thing. Had it for ages. Hardly wear it." She turned away quickly. "Margaret's book club ran late. You eat anything?" Tom watched her movements, hurried, avoiding his gaze. 42 years of marriage had taught him her rhythms. These weren't them. "Thought I might check the bank statement," he said casually. "Been some unusual charges on my card lately." Evelyn's shoulders tensed momentarily. "Probably just mistakes." "You know how those credit card companies are, always making errors." She laughed, a pitch too high. "I'll look into it tomorrow." Later, as Evelyn showered, Tom sat at the computer in their spare room. The search for Michael Lewis Financial Advisor, the name on the business card he'd glimpsed in her purse, yielded results that turned his stomach cold. Lewis specialized in high-asset divorce planning. Tom's hands trembled as he cleared the browser history. The bathroom door opened down the hall, and he quickly shut down the computer. Back in their bedroom, he watched Evelyn apply expensive night cream, another new addition he couldn't recall purchasing. Sleep evaded him that night. Beside him, Evelyn's breathing remained too measured, too conscious. She wasn't sleeping either. The wall between them, once unimaginable, now felt as solid as the oak headboard he'd crafted for their 20th anniversary. Morning found Tom in the bathroom, door locked, staring at his reflection. Crow's feet deepened by decades of laughter, now framed eyes reddened by sleeplessness. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he wiped it away roughly. "Pull yourself together, old man," he whispered to his reflection. Dignity was all he might have left when this was over. He splashed cold water on his face and returned to the bedroom. Evelyn's purse sat on her vanity, carelessly open. Tom hesitated, a lifetime of respect for privacy warring with growing suspicion. The woodworker in him, the man who could feel when a joint wasn't true, knew something was profoundly wrong with the life they'd built. His decision made, Tom waited until Evelyn went downstairs before carefully examining the purse's contents. Beneath her wallet lay a receipt for the bracelet, dated yesterday, price tag making his eyes widen, and a handwritten note. "Meeting with M, Thursday, 2 p.m. Bring final documents." Tom's heart hammered against his ribs. Thursday was tomorrow. Whatever Evelyn planned was imminent. And he replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, the precision of a craftsman now serving a different purpose. Downstairs, Evelyn announced she was visiting her sister tomorrow afternoon. The lie settled between them like sawdust in the air. Fine, almost invisible, but unmistakably present to a man who'd worked with wood all his life. Tom watched Evelyn's car disappear down the street Thursday afternoon, her excuse about visiting her sister still hanging in the air like the scent of her perfume. He gave it 15 minutes, enough time to ensure she wouldn't return for a forgotten purse or phone, before beginning his methodical search of their home. His workshop had always been his sanctuary, a place where wood transformed under his patient hands. Today, it served as his base of operations. The workbench where he'd crafted furniture for decades now holding his coffee mug, and a notepad where he listed the rooms to search. Tom was no detective, but 40 years of finding solutions to woodworking problems had taught him to be systematic. He started with Evelyn's dresser drawers, feeling a pang of guilt that quickly faded when he discovered a burner phone tucked beneath her sweaters. His weathered fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar technology, but he managed to unlock it. The password was their anniversary date, an irony that wasn't lost on him. The text messages confirmed his worst fears. Dozens of exchanges with someone saved simply as M. Michael Lewis, he presumed. Romantic messages interspersed with cold discussions of assets and strategy. Tom's hands began to shake so badly he had to set the phone down on the bed they'd shared for over 4 decades. "How long?" he whispered to the empty room, his voice breaking. "How long have you been planning this?" The final blow came in Evelyn's home office. The locked desk drawer yielded to his persistent efforts. A man who built furniture knew how to open one. Inside lay a manila folder containing preliminary divorce papers, the words "urgent" and "filing next week" scrawled in Evelyn's handwriting across a post-it note. Tom's eyes blurred as he read the document, noting the calculated undervaluation of their home, the home he'd spent years renovating with his own hands, and the dismissal of his woodshop as a hobby space rather than the business it had become in his retirement. One notation particularly struck him. Advantage: ML confirms T's brother, attorney, can be conflicted out due to family connection. She'd thought of everything, even his estranged brother Marcus. Tom hadn't spoken to Marcus in nearly 15 years, not since their falling out over their parents' estate. The fact that Evelyn had considered him as a potential obstacle suggested how long and carefully she'd been plotting. The weight of betrayal drove Tom to his workshop, where he collapsed onto his stool, surrounded by the projects he'd lovingly crafted over the years. Half finished was a jewelry box intended as a surprise for their upcoming anniversary. The walnut and maple he'd selected with such care now seemed to mock him with their beauty. Silent sobs shook his body, tears falling onto the workshop floor where countless wood shavings had fallen before. This place of creation now witnessed destruction, the unraveling of what he'd believed was an unbreakable bond. For several minutes, he allowed himself to break. Then, like countless times when he'd cut a piece of wood incorrectly or discovered a flaw in the grain, Tom took a deep breath and began to think about how to solve the problem before him. His gaze fell on an old family photo tucked in the corner of his pegboard, him and Marcus as young men, standing proudly beside their first major woodworking project. Before the arguments, before the silence, before years of stubbornness had built a wall between them. Tom reached for his phone, thumb hovering over the contact he'd never deleted but hadn't used in 15 years. Pride had kept him from making this call for too long. Now, with everything at stake, pride seemed a luxury he could no longer afford. As he pressed the call button, he heard a car door slam outside. Through the workshop window, he caught sight of an unfamiliar sedan parked across the street, its driver watching his house with unusual interest. Friend or foe? Tom couldn't be sure, but instinct told him the battle lines were being drawn. The phone rang in his ear as he watched the shadow move in the car. After the 4th ring, a familiar voice answered, older, more formal, but unmistakably his brother's. Marcus speaking. The reception area of Marcus Reynolds, attorney at law, exuded success in every detail, from the Italian leather chairs to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. Tom felt distinctly out of place in his flannel shirt and work jeans, calloused hands clutching a manila folder containing the evidence of Evelyn's betrayal. "Mr. Reynolds will see you now," the receptionist announced, her professional tone giving no indication she knew he was the boss's estranged brother. Tom's boots sounded heavy on the polished floor as he followed her down a hallway lined with Marcus's achievements, law degrees, bar association awards, newspaper clippings of landmark cases. 15 years of silence reflected in framed accomplishments Tom had never witnessed. The office door opened to reveal Marcus rising from behind an imposing desk. At 67, his hair had turned completely silver, but he maintained the straight-backed posture Tom remembered. The brothers regarded each other for a long moment, decades of unspoken words hanging between them. "You look well, Tom," Marcus finally said, gesturing to a chair. "You too," Tom replied, noting how strange his voice sounded in this sterile environment. "Nice setup you've got here." Small talk felt absurd given the circumstances, but neither man seemed ready to breach the wall their silence had built. "Coffee?" Marcus offered, already pouring from a carafe on his credenza. "Sure." Tom accepted the cup, noticing how his brother remembered he took it black. Some details hadn't faded with time. He took a sip, then set the cup down, hands still trembling slightly. "I wouldn't have come if—" "I know," Marcus interrupted. "Something serious brought you here. What is it?" Tom opened the folder, spreading its contents across Marcus's immaculate desk. The credit card statements, photographs of text messages, the divorce papers. As he explained, his voice cracked several times, the humiliation of Evelyn's betrayal compounded by having to admit it to his successful brother. 42 years, Tom said, a tear escaping despite his effort to maintain composure. "Thought I knew her. Turns out I didn't know a damn thing." Marcus listened without interruption, his expression shifting from professional detachment to genuine concern. When Tom finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture so familiar it transported Tom back to their childhood. "She's working with Michael Lewis," Marcus said, sorting through the papers. "I know him. Specializes in helping wealthy spouses hide assets before filing." He looked up at Tom. "I'm sorry this is happening to you." "Can you help me?" Tom asked, the question costing him more pride than he'd expected. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he opened a drawer and withdrew a folder that looked well handled. "Did you know your Kingwood Crafters Workshop was featured in American Woodworker last year?" Tom stared in surprise as Marcus spread out magazine clippings, photographs, and even a few local newspaper articles, all about Tom's woodworking business and teaching program. "You've been keeping tabs on me?" "Always," Marcus admitted quietly. "Just because we weren't speaking doesn't mean I stopped caring." He touched one of the photos. "Remember how you taught me to sand with the grain? Said patience makes the difference between good work and great work? You were always in a hurry," Tom recalled, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Still am," Marcus confessed, "but I remember the lessons." He gestured to the evidence. "And I think it's time to show Evelyn and this Lewis character what happens when they try to take advantage of a Reynolds." For the next few hours, the brothers pieced together the extent of Evelyn's deception. Marcus brought in his paralegal and a forensic accountant, building a comprehensive picture of financial manipulation that stretched back nearly 2 years. "She's been systematically moving funds," the accountant explained, pointing to a timeline they'd constructed. "Setting up accounts you don't know about, undervaluing assets you've built, documenting the house as primarily her investment." Tom's anger built with each revelation. "The house I renovated with these hands," he said, holding up his calloused palms. "Every door, every cabinet, every piece of trim, I made or restored it all." "And we'll prove that," Marcus assured him. "Your work has value, Tom, significant value." As afternoon faded into evening, Tom found himself telling Marcus about the community woodworking classes he taught, the troubled teens who found purpose in crafting something beautiful, the satisfaction of passing on skills that seemed increasingly rare in a disposable world. "You've made a difference," Marcus said. "Meanwhile, I've just been making money." For the first time, vulnerability showed in the successful attorney's expression. "We took different paths," Tom acknowledged. "Doesn't mean either was wrong." When they finally rose to leave, the office long empty except for them, an awkward moment passed as neither man knew how to end the encounter. Then Marcus extended his hand, which Tom took. The handshake turned into an embrace, brief but genuine. Tom's tears dampening the shoulder of his brother's expensive suit. "She didn't count on you having me," Marcus said as they pulled apart. Tom nodded, finding his voice. "No, she didn't, and that might be her biggest mistake." As they walked out together, Tom noticed a wall of photographs he'd missed on the way in. Marcus with important clients, at charity events, receiving awards. In the center, partially hidden behind others but still there, was a picture of two young men with their first handcrafted table. The brothers, before time and pride had separated them. Marcus followed his gaze. "Some things you don't let go of," he said simply, "no matter what." The corner diner had been Tom's Saturday morning ritual for over a decade. The same worn vinyl booth, the same coffee mug with a chip on the handle, the same friendly exchanges with Doris, who'd been serving breakfast there since before Tom moved to town. It was one of those anchors in life he'd taken for granted. Until today. The bell above the door jingled as Tom entered, nodding to the regulars. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Conversations paused briefly. Glances darted his way before quickly averting. Tom made his way to the counter, hyper-aware of the whispers that followed him. "The usual, Tom?" Doris asked, coffee pot already in hand, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Please," he replied, noticing how she avoided direct eye contact. She filled his mug, hesitated, then leaned closer. "You hanging in there, honey? I've been hearing things." Tom's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" Doris glanced around before lowering her voice. "Evelyn's been telling folks at her book club that you two are separating. Says you've been—" She searched for words. "Difficult to live with. That your workshop business has been losing money, and you've been taking it out on her." The coffee turned bitter in Tom's mouth. He'd expected financial deception, not character assassination. "She mentioned specifics?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Said you've been controlling with money, suspicious of her spending. That's why she had to—" Doris trailed off, discomfort evident in her expression. "Had to what, Doris?" "Get her own accounts, for protection." She placed a sympathetic hand on his arm. "I've known you too long to believe it, Tom. But others—" As if on cue, Ed Blackwell, Tom's fishing buddy for 15 years, entered the diner. Their eyes met briefly before Ed deliberately chose a table far from Tom's spot, offering only a curt nod. The rejection stung like sandpaper against bare skin. Tom finished his coffee in silence, left too large a tip, and walked out into the rain that had started falling, appropriate weather for his darkening mood. His next stop was Marcus's office, where the morning's developments grew worse. Marcus spread documents across the conference table, his expression grim. "The financial trail is complicated," he explained. "Evelyn's been clever about hiding assets, and Lewis has been guiding her. The problem is proving it legally." Tom watched as the forensic accountant pointed out discrepancies in their accounts. Money moved through multiple banks, investments liquidated without his knowledge, documentation that made her contributions to their marriage seem disproportionately valuable. "The paperwork she's preparing makes your woodworking look like a money-losing hobby," Marcus continued. "She's documented every penny she's put into the household while minimizing your contributions." "I built our life with these hands," Tom said, voice hollow. "The furniture in our home would cost a fortune to buy. The renovations I did saved us tens of thousands." "We know that," Marcus assured him. "But legally, he means we need documentation," the accountant interjected. "Receipts for materials, invoices for your work, proof of the market value of your craftsmanship." Tom's heart sank. "I've never been much for paperwork. Many jobs were for friends, payments in cash, materials bought years ago." Marcus and the accountant exchanged glances that made Tom's chest tighten. The office suddenly felt too warm, too confining. "There's more," Marcus said reluctantly. Evelyn's filing includes allegations that you've been emotionally withdrawn, that your workshop obsession has been a form of neglect. That's a lie, Tom protested, anger rising through his despair. I believe you, Marcus said, but courts look at patterns, documentation. She's been building her case for years while you've been building furniture. He hesitated. And she's retained Jameson as counsel. Judge Jameson's son? Marcus nodded grimly. The very same. The implications crashed over Tom like a collapsing shelf. He'd built Judge Jameson's chamber's furniture years ago, work the judge had praised but never fully paid for, claiming budget constraints. Now his son would be arguing against Tom in his courtroom. As the meeting continued, Tom's hands began to shake so badly he had to clasp them together under the table. The coffee Marcus had provided sat untouched until Tom's elbow bumped it, sending the dark liquid spreading across documents like a stain across his future. I'm sorry, Tom said, jumping up as Marcus and the accountant scrambled to save the papers. It's fine, Marcus insisted, but Tom could see frustration in his brother's eyes. After the documents were blotted and order restored, Marcus walked Tom to the elevator. We're not giving up, he assured him, but I need you to prepare yourself. This could get ugly before it gets better. Outside the building, rain now pouring in sheets, Tom stood unmoving until his clothes were soaked through. The weight of everything, Evelyn's betrayal, the community's changed perception, the legal mountain ahead, pressed down on him until his legs could barely support his frame. He found himself driving aimlessly, eventually parking near the lake where he and Evelyn had spent countless Sunday afternoons in their early years. The rain created ripples across the water's surface, distorting reflections, just as his memories now seemed distorted by new knowledge. Tom's composure finally broke. Alone in his truck, he sobbed, deep, heaving cries that shook his entire body. Tears for a life built on what he now realized was shifting sand. Tears for the humiliation of having his character questioned by people who'd broken bread at his table. Tears for the dawning realization that he might lose everything: home, savings, reputation, all crafted as carefully as the furniture he'd built by hand. A knock on his window startled him. Through rain-blurred glass, he saw Patricia Johnson, the retired librarian who lived down the street. Tom hastily wiped his face and rolled down the window. Thought that was your truck, she said, holding her umbrella so it partially sheltered his window. You all right, Tom? Just having a moment, he admitted, embarrassed to be caught in such a state. Patricia's eyes held no judgment, only concern. I've been having a lot of those myself since Henry passed. She paused. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about Evelyn. Some things haven't been sitting right with me. Tom felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced all day: hope. Has betrayal left you feeling utterly alone? Share your darkest moment below, like if you've felt this despair, and follow to see how Tom finds strength when everything seems lost. Tom's kitchen table had hosted countless family dinners over the decades, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings. Tonight, it served a different purpose, a war room where the battle for his life's work would be planned. The surface disappeared beneath spread documents, legal pads, and coffee mugs that Marcus refilled as midnight approached. Let me get this straight, Marcus said, reviewing his notes from Patricia's unexpected testimony. You noticed inconsistencies in Evelyn's stories months ago? Patricia nodded, her librarian's precision evident in the detailed timeline she'd maintained. It started at our bridge club last January. Evelyn mentioned a weekend trip to visit her sister in Oak Ridge, but I'd just spoken with her sister at the community center fundraiser. She was definitely in town that weekend. And you kept notes on this? Tom asked, still amazed by the meticulous documentation Patricia had compiled. 30 years of cataloging teaches you to track details, she replied with a small smile. At first I thought I was being nosy, but the discrepancies kept mounting, and something felt wrong. Marcus tapped his pen thoughtfully. These observations establish a pattern of deception that predates any marital issues Evelyn claims triggered her actions. There's more, Patricia said, pulling out her phone. I have photos from the Chamber of Commerce dinner in March. Evelyn attended with a man she introduced as her financial advisor. They seemed unusually familiar. The photo showed Evelyn laughing with Michael Lewis, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture too intimate for a professional relationship. Tom's throat tightened at the visual confirmation of the affair, but the woodworker in him, the man who knew that proper measurement prevents later problems, appreciated having concrete evidence rather than just suspicion. This helps significantly, Marcus confirmed. Between Patricia's timeline, these photos, and the financial records we've uncovered, we're building a solid case. He turned to the forensic accountant. What have you found on Lewis? The accountant pulled up files on his laptop. Michael Lewis has been involved in 3 similar cases in the past 5 years, all following the same pattern. He begins as a financial advisor to wealthy married women, develops a personal relationship, then guides them through divorces where assets are hidden or undervalued. In 2 cases, the husbands received significantly reduced settlements. And the third? Tom asked. The husband fought back with substantial evidence of fraud. Lewis and the wife were forced to return hidden assets, and Lewis nearly faced disbarment. Marcus leaned forward. That's our precedent. We can use that case to establish a pattern of behavior. For the first time in days, Tom felt the vice around his chest loosen slightly. He wasn't alone in this fight. As the night progressed, more pieces fell into place. The accountant found offshore accounts linked to Evelyn. Marcus's paralegal discovered a sealed divorce record from another state. Evelyn's brief first marriage that she'd claimed ended with her husband's death. She was married before me? Tom asked, stunned by this fundamental deception. She told me Ronald died in a car accident before they celebrated their first anniversary. Ronald Weaver is very much alive in Arizona, the paralegal confirmed. Their divorce settlement shows a similar pattern of hidden assets and false claims. Tom rose from the table, needing a moment to process this revelation. He moved to the window, looking out at his workshop where a soft light still burned. He'd forgotten to turn it off in the chaos of recent days. That small oversight felt symbolic of his life slipping out of his careful control. Patricia joined him at the window. You know, I've always admired how you built things to last, Tom. Not many do that anymore. Her simple observation unlocked something in Tom's chest, a surge of determination that had been buried under layers of hurt and betrayal. My father taught me that anything worth building is worth building right, he said, voice growing stronger. You don't cut corners. You don't use cheap materials. And you sure as hell don't let someone tear down your work without a fight. He turned back to the table where Marcus was outlining a legal strategy. For the first time, Tom really looked at his brother, not the successful attorney, but the boy who had once followed him around their father's workshop, eager to learn. Despite 15 years of estrangement, here was Marcus, fighting for him with the same intensity he brought to his highest-profile cases. Remember when Dad caught us using his good chisels without permission? Tom asked suddenly. Marcus looked up, surprised. You took the blame, even though it was my idea. And you stood up and told the truth before he could punish me. The brothers shared a look of understanding that transcended the years of silence. I'm still standing up for the truth, Marcus said simply. As dawn approached, the kitchen filled with the golden light of a new day. The strategy was set. They would file a countersuit alleging fraud, present evidence of the affair with Lewis, introduce Patricia's testimony about Evelyn's pattern of deception, and bring in an expert to assess the true value of Tom's craftsmanship throughout their home. The forensic accountant packaged his findings neatly. I'll testify that these financial movements constitute a deliberate attempt to defraud you of your rightful assets. Patricia gathered her notes. Bridge Club meets tomorrow. I can discreetly speak with other members who might have noticed inconsistencies in Evelyn's stories. As their allies departed, the brothers remained at the table. empty coffee mugs between them. "You think we can win this?" Tom asked. "I know we can," Marcus replied with the confidence that had made him one of the state's most feared attorneys. "She didn't count on you having me." After a pause, he added, "And I didn't count on how much I missed having you." Tom felt tears well up, not tears of despair this time, but of something he hadn't expected to find in this crisis: reconciliation. He reached across the table and gripped his brother's arm. "Guess some things are built to last after all," he said, voice rough with emotion. Marcus nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Like a well-made joint," he replied, remembering one of their father's favorite woodworking metaphors. Stronger after pressures applied. For the first time since discovering Evelyn's betrayal, Tom found himself laughing, a genuine release that his brother joined. The sound filled the kitchen, washing away years of silence and days of despair. Outside, the workshop light still burned, no longer an oversight but a beacon. Tom would return there today, not to hide in his sanctuary, but to gather evidence of his life's work, the true value he had built with patience, skill, and integrity. Values that Evelyn had never really understood, but that would now help him reclaim what was rightfully his. Dawn filtered through the bedroom curtains as Tom straightened his tie, the suit he wore for student woodworking graduations, hanging differently on his frame after days of stress and little appetite. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself, the confident craftsman replaced by a man preparing for battle in an unfamiliar arena. The reflection of the wedding photo still on his dresser caught his eye. Tom hadn't removed it, a decision that wasn't about hope, but evidence, the beginning of a contract now broken. He allowed himself one moment to mourn what he'd believed they had, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek before he wiped it away with resolution. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked from the doorway, already dressed in the armor of his profession, an impeccably tailored suit that conveyed authority without a word being spoken. "What if I can't face her?" Tom asked quietly, voicing the fear that had haunted his restless night. 42 years, Marcus. That's most of my life." Marcus crossed the room and straightened Tom's already straight tie, a brotherly gesture that transcended their years apart. "You already have faced her," he said firmly. "Every day since you found that statement. Every minute you've spent building our case instead of breaking apart." Tom nodded, drawing strength from his brother's confidence. The past week had transformed them both. Marcus softening his prosecutorial edge, Tom finding steel beneath his craftsman's patience. They had become a formidable combination of precision and persistence. Downstairs, they reviewed their strategy one final time. The dining table that had served as their war room now held the files they would take to court. Patricia's timeline of Evelyn's deceptions, the forensic accountant's report on hidden assets, photographs of Tom's craftsmanship throughout the home with professional appraisals of their value. "Remember," Marcus advised as they gathered the documents, "Evelyn expects you to be emotional, maybe even irrational. That's the narrative she's created, the declining craftsman clinging to delusions of worth." "And what am I instead?" Tom asked, sliding papers into the leather portfolio Marcus had given him. "You're a master builder whose work speaks for itself," Marcus replied. "You're a respected teacher whose students testify to your mental acuity, and you're my brother, which means you're a hell of a lot tougher than she realizes." Tom managed to smile, checking his watch, an heirloom from their father that he'd recently restored. "Time to go," he said, squaring his shoulders. At the front door, Tom paused for one last look at the home he'd poured himself into. Whatever happened today, he would not return to the same house he was leaving. Either Evelyn would be exposed and her claims dismissed, or he would lose much of what he'd spent his life building. "One step at a time," Marcus reminded him gently. "Like you taught me with woodworking. Measure twice, cut once, and trust the process." The drive to the courthouse passed in contemplative silence. Tom watched the familiar landmarks of his town slide by, wondering how many neighbors had heard Evelyn's version of their marriage, how many had already judged him without evidence. The thought brought a fresh wave of determination. Today was about more than assets. It was about truth. When trust is shattered, finding strength to stand tall takes incredible courage. Comment if you've faced betrayal, like if you're finding your voice, and follow to witness Tom's moment of truth. As they parked, Marcus revealed one last piece of information. "I've saved this for today so you could walk in with your head high," he said, handing Tom a folder. Evelyn's financial advisor lover has been involved in 3 similar cases. In the most recent, he nearly faced disbarment for fraud. Tom reviewed the documents, a surge of validation washing through him. This confirms everything we suspected. More importantly, Marcus added, it establishes a pattern that any judge will recognize. This isn't about a failing marriage, it's about a calculated scheme. They exited the car, Tom's work-roughened hand momentarily resting on the polished hood, the contrast between his world and the one he was about to enter. As they approached the courthouse steps, he spotted Evelyn arriving with her attorney and Michael Lewis. She wore an outfit he'd never seen before, projecting an image of conservative refinement that contradicted the extravagant purchases he'd discovered. For a moment, their eyes met across the plaza. Tom expected to feel rage or heartbreak, but instead found himself experiencing an unexpected emotion: pity. Evelyn had schemed and lied, betrayed and manipulated, all to obtain what she could have simply asked for had she been honest. She had sacrificed integrity for advantage, and would soon discover the true cost of that trade. "You okay?" Marcus asked, noticing the exchange. Tom nodded, surprising himself with the truth of his response. "I am," he said. "For the first time in days, I really am." They climbed the courthouse steps together, brothers in stride after years apart, united by crisis but reconnected by something deeper than circumstance. The massive doors opened to a marble hallway echoing with footsteps and whispered conversations. Tom paused at the threshold of the courtroom, drawing a deep breath. Inside waited judgment, scrutiny, and confrontation, all things the private craftsman had avoided throughout his life. But also waiting was vindication, truth, and the chance to stand up for the value of his life's work. "Ready?" Marcus asked one final time. Tom thought of his workshop, where he taught young people that mistakes weren't failures, but opportunities to demonstrate problem-solving. He thought of the wood he shaped, how pressure and proper tools revealed its true beauty rather than destroying it. He thought of his father's wisdom. The measure of your work isn't how it looks on day one, but how it stands the test of time. "Ready," Tom confirmed, stepping forward to meet whatever came next. The courtroom's polished oak paneling reminded Tom of cherry wood, beautiful on the surface but prone to unexpected movement under pressure. He sat beside Marcus at the plaintiff's table, acutely aware of Evelyn and her counsel across the aisle. 15 feet of physical distance represented an unbridgeable emotional chasm after 42 years of marriage. Judge Eleanor Harmon entered, her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency preceding her. Tom recognized the bench where she sat. He'd refinished it 5 years ago when the courthouse underwent renovations. That small connection to the room steadied him slightly. Evelyn's attorney, Stuart Jameson, presented her case first. His polished delivery painted a portrait of a devoted wife who had financially supported a husband's woodworking hobby for decades, only to be met with emotional withdrawal and suspicion in their later years. Mrs. Reynolds simply wishes to secure her financial future after supporting her husband's craft for over 40 years, Jameson concluded smoothly. The documentation clearly shows her contributions far outweigh the assets she's requesting. Tom watched Evelyn during this presentation, her perfectly composed expression, the occasional dabbing of eyes that remained suspiciously dry, the sympathetic nods from Michael Lewis in the gallery. It was a performance worthy of recognition, but Tom had spent his life learning to spot veneer over poor material. When Marcus rose to speak, Tom noticed the shift in his brother's demeanor, the casual confidence of their strategy sessions replaced by the focused intensity that had made him one of the state's most feared divorce attorneys. "Your Honor," Marcus began, "this case is not about a deteriorating marriage or securing a fair division of assets. The evidence will show this is about fraud, deliberate deception, and a calculated scheme orchestrated by Mrs. Reynolds and her financial advisor, Michael Lewis." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's composed mask slipped momentarily, her eyes darting to Lewis. Marcus methodically laid out their counterclaim, presenting the forensic accountant's findings first. Bank statements, transfer records, and offshore accounts appeared on the courtroom's display screen, each transaction highlighting the systematic movement of funds beyond Tom's knowledge or access. Mrs. Reynolds began transferring joint assets 23 months ago, Marcus explained, precisely when her relationship with financial advisor Michael Lewis began, as documented by these communications. The text messages between Evelyn and Lewis appeared next, romantic exchanges interspersed with strategic financial discussions. Tom watched Evelyn's face pale as her private words appeared for all to see. "The financial records tell a very different story than the one presented by counsel," Marcus continued. "Far from supporting my client's hobby, Mrs. Reynolds has been actively undermining their joint financial interests while pursuing a relationship with Mr. Lewis." Judge Harmon's expression remained neutral, but her focused attention on the evidence spoke volumes. "And Mr. Lewis's involvement beyond a personal relationship?" she inquired. "Mr. Lewis has been involved in 3 previous cases following this exact pattern," Marcus replied, introducing the documentation Tom had reviewed that morning. "In each instance, he established a relationship with a married woman of means, advised her on hiding assets before filing for divorce, and then remained involved romantically after favorable settlements were obtained." Lewis shifted uncomfortably in his seat as his professional history was exposed. Jameson rose to object, but Marcus had anticipated every procedural challenge, presenting certified court records that couldn't be dismissed. The morning proceeded with devastating precision as Marcus called their witnesses. The forensic accountant testified to the deliberate nature of the financial manipulations. Patricia provided her timeline of Evelyn's deceptions, her librarian's methodical documentation lending credibility to each observation. When Tom took the stand, Marcus guided him through testimony about his woodworking business, not as a hobby but as a recognized craft that had been featured in national publications and provided substantial income through commissions and teaching. "And the renovations to your home?" Marcus asked. "I performed them all," Tom replied steadily, "from structural work to cabinetry, flooring to furniture. At market value, those improvements would cost well over $200,000. The professional appraiser who followed confirmed this assessment, presenting photographs and valuations of Tom's work throughout their home. "The craftsmanship represents not merely functional improvements," she testified, "but artisanal work that significantly enhances the property's value beyond standard renovations." By lunch recess, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Evelyn's initial confidence had crumbled into visible anxiety as she huddled with her attorney. Tom caught Lewis attempting to distance himself, sitting separately in the gallery rather than beside her as he had been that morning. "We're in strong position," Marcus assured Tom as they reviewed notes during the break. "Jameson knows it. He'll likely approach for settlement discussions soon." True to prediction, Jameson requested a meeting in the judge's chambers before proceedings resumed. Inside the private room, with its leather chairs and bookshelves Tom had built years ago, the opposing counsel proposed a settlement that bore little resemblance to Evelyn's initial demands. "My client is prepared to relinquish claims to the house and workshop," Jameson offered stiffly. "She would accept a 30% division of remaining assets, provided certain personal items are returned." Marcus smiled thinly. My client will retain the house, workshop, and all contents he crafted. Mrs. Reynolds will receive 20% of liquid assets, none of the retirement accounts she attempted to hide, and will return all jewelry purchased in the last 24 months with joint funds. That's outrageous, Jameson protested. Less outrageous than the fraud your client attempted, Marcus countered. We haven't yet introduced the evidence of her previous divorce that she concealed from my client throughout their marriage. Another pattern of deception that Judge Harmon would find relevant. Judge Harmon, watching this exchange with experienced eyes, addressed Jameson directly. Counselor, having seen the morning's evidence, I would carefully consider the offer. Should this proceed to judgment, I would be obligated to refer the financial discrepancies to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. When they returned to the courtroom, Evelyn's composure had completely vanished. She signed the settlement agreement with trembling hands, avoiding Tom's gaze entirely. The proceedings concluded with Judge Harmon's approval of terms that not only preserved Tom's home and workshop, but acknowledged the value of his craftsmanship as legitimate contribution to their marital assets. One last matter, Marcus added before proceedings concluded. We request that the court acknowledge the inappropriate professional conduct of Michael Lewis and refer his actions to the State Bar Association for review. Judge Harmon nodded. So ordered. This court takes a dim view of financial professionals who abuse their position of trust. Lewis slipped out of the courtroom before proceedings formally ended, abandoning Evelyn to face the consequences alone. As the judge gavelled the session closed, Tom felt a single tear track down his cheek. Not from grief or anger, but from vindication. The tear represented release from months of deception and days of uncertainty. The physical manifestation of justice finally served. Outside the courtroom, Patricia waited with several neighbors whose expressions had transformed from earlier suspicion to evident support. The truth had emerged, and with it, Tom's standing in the community he'd served for decades. You did it, Marcus said quietly as they gathered their documents. Tom shook his head slightly. We did it, he corrected, meeting his brother's gaze with newfound appreciation. I'd forgotten what it's like to have family in your corner. Marcus smiled, the formal attorney momentarily replaced by the younger brother Tom remembered. Well, get used to it again. I'm not going anywhere this time. They walked together through the courthouse corridors, past Evelyn sitting alone on a bench, her carefully constructed future now as empty as the space beside her. Tom felt no triumph in her solitude, only sad recognition of choices that had led to this moment. He nodded to her once, a gesture acknowledging their shared past without rancor, before continuing toward the sunlight streaming through the courthouse doors, where a different future awaited. 3 weeks after the courthouse victory, Tom stood in his workshop, early morning light filtering through windows freshly washed of years of sawdust accumulation. The familiar scents of pine and linseed oil wrapped around him like an old friend as he ran his hand along the workbench where countless projects had taken shape under his patient guidance. The workshop had always been his sanctuary, but in recent days it had transformed into something more, a launching point for his reconstructed life. Gone was the half-finished jewelry box intended for Evelyn. In its place stood 2 matching rocking chairs taking shape from walnut harvested from the Reynolds family property decades ago, wood his father had set aside for something special someday. The sound of tires on gravel announced Marcus's arrival. These Sunday morning visits had quickly become routine, bridging 15 years of silence with the comfortable rhythm of renewed brotherhood. Tom smiled as he heard the familiar footsteps approaching, followed by a knock on the workshop door. Marcus still maintained the woodshop rule their father had instilled. Always announce yourself before entering a craftsman's space. "Coffee's fresh," Tom called out, setting aside his spokes halve. Marcus entered carrying a pastry box from the bakery downtown. "Thought we could use some fuel," he said, placing the box on the only clear corner of the workbench. Those chairs are coming along nicely. Should be ready by next weekend, Tom replied, wiping his hands on his apron. Just in time for your birthday. You didn't have to do that, Marcus said, though the appreciation in his eyes belied his protest. Wanted to. Been too many birthdays missed. The brothers settled into their comfortable routine, discussing plans for the day over coffee and pastries. Marcus had helped Tom remove the last of Evelyn's possessions the previous week, the house now feeling lighter, cleaner somehow, as though a persistent draft had finally been sealed. Patricia called, Marcus mentioned between bites. She's organizing some kind of welcome-back dinner with the neighbors tomorrow night. Said to tell you attendance is non-negotiable. Tom nodded, touched by the community's efforts to reintegrate him after the truth about Evelyn's deceptions had become public knowledge. Friends who had briefly withdrawn had returned with apologies and casseroles, embarrassed by their quick judgments. She's a good woman, Patricia, Tom observed. Kept faith when others didn't. Speaking of faith, Marcus said, brushing crumbs from his casual weekend attire, I've been thinking about Dad's old saying, about how the true test of craftsmanship isn't how something looks when it's new, but how it holds up over time. Tom nodded, remembering the woodworking wisdom their father had dispensed alongside technical instruction. Seems to me, Marcus continued, that applies to more than furniture. Our brotherhood didn't break under pressure, just got set aside for a while. Turns out it was built better than we thought. Tom felt tears well up, healing tears, different from the anguished sobs of discovery or the vindicated tear in the courtroom. These represented something he hadn't expected to find in the wreckage of his marriage. Renewal. Guess that's true of me too, Tom reflected. Didn't shatter when everything fell apart. Bent a little, maybe. More than a little, Marcus corrected with a gentle smile. But you've got good grain, strong core. They carried their coffee to the front porch, settling into old wooden chairs that Tom had already earmarked for replacement with the new rockers. The morning sun warmed their faces as they surveyed the property, the garden that needed attention, the sagging gutter Tom had added to his repair list, the old oak tree that had witnessed the entirety of Tom's marriage and now stood sentinel over its aftermath. I've been thinking, Tom said after a comfortable silence. Those woodworking classes I teach at the community center, been getting more interest lately, especially from retirees wanting to learn a new skill. Marcus nodded encouragingly. Thought maybe I could expand that. Turn the spare bedroom into an office, handle the business side properly. Maybe write up some of Dad's old techniques, publish them for other craftsmen. Tom glanced at his brother. Might need some legal advice about setting up a proper business structure. I know a pretty good attorney, Marcus replied with a grin. Bit of a hard ass in the courtroom, but I hear he gives family discounts. They shared a laugh that felt like another board fitted perfectly into the framework of their reconstructed relationship. As they sat companionably on the porch, Mrs. Holloway from the neighborhood association approached with a covered dish. Tom Reynolds, don't you think for 1 minute you're eating bachelor food tonight, she announced without preamble. My chicken casserole won the Methodist cookbook competition 3 years running. Tom accepted the dish with genuine thanks, recognizing it for what it was, not just food, but community acceptance, a restoration of his place in the social fabric of the neighborhood. After Mrs. Holloway departed with an invitation to her grandson's graduation next month, Tom and Marcus returned to the workshop. The matching rockers stood side by side, almost complete but for the final details that would make them distinctly their own. Never thought I'd be starting over at 65, Tom admitted as he showed Marcus how to properly sand with the grain, just as he had when they were boys. Not starting over, Marcus corrected, following his brother's guidance with careful strokes. Just building something new with seasoned materials. Tom smiled at the aptness of the woodworking metaphor. The wood beneath his hands had been harvested decades ago, stored properly, aged to perfection, now finding its purpose in creating something that would outlast both of them. As afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, the brothers worked in tandem, the younger learning from the elder, the space filled with the soft sounds of creation, sandpaper whispering across grain, the occasional tap of a mallet, comfortable conversation flowing as easily as wood shavings curling from a sharp plane. Outside, spring flowers had begun blooming in the garden Evelyn had once tended, now a bit wild but no less beautiful for its untamed growth. Inside the workshop, another kind of renewal took shape under skilled hands that knew how to bring out the inherent beauty in raw materials, how to strengthen what was weak, how to smooth what had been rough. By evening, as they stood back to admire their progress, Tom felt something he had thought might be lost forever: peace. Not the false peace of ignorance before discovery, but the earned tranquility that comes from weathering a storm and finding yourself still standing, battered perhaps, but unbroken. "There's still so much I want to create," Tom said, surveying his workshop with fresh eyes. "So much I want to teach." Marcus placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, the gesture bridging years and hurts with simple human connection. "Then that's exactly what you'll do," he said with certainty. "One piece at a time. Just like always." Tom nodded, running his hand over the smooth arm of the nearly completed rocking chair, feeling the connection between past, present, and future in the solid reality of craftsmanship. Some things could be broken beyond repair, but others, the things built with care, integrity, and genuine skill, those could withstand even the harshest trials, emerging not diminished but refined, their true value finally recognized in full light. You know what it's like, don't you? That moment when everything you believed solid suddenly reveals itself to be built on sand. We've all sat at a kitchen table, hands trembling around a piece of paper that changes everything. Like Tom with that credit card statement, we felt that first tear fall, silent, almost embarrassed, as decades of trust crack like poorly seasoned wood. Truth is, betrayal at our age cuts deeper than when we were young. Back then, we had time to rebuild. Now, with more years behind us than ahead, it feels like someone's not just stealing our present, but rewriting our past. Those memories you treasured, those shared sacrifices you made together, the quiet pride of building something that would last, all called into question with a single discovery. But here's what I've learned. Watching Tom's journey from that first sob in his workshop to standing tall in that courtroom. We're tougher than we look, us old folks. Years of weathering life's storms have seasoned us like well-cured hardwood. When Tom applied the woodworker's eye, the same patient scrutiny he'd given countless pieces of furniture, to his broken marriage, he found not just deception, but his own forgotten strength. Remember how he sat in that empty house, surrounded by the fruits of his craftsmanship? How he recognized that his work, like his character, had real, tangible value that couldn't be diminished by someone else's lies. That moment when tears of despair transformed into tears of determination, that's the moment that matters, friends. That's where we find ourselves again. Maybe your betrayal wasn't a spouse's affair or hidden bank accounts. Maybe it was a child who forgot your birthday, a friend who vanished during illness, or a world that seems determined to make you invisible as your hair grays. The wound is the same. The sudden realization that what you valued isn't valued in return. But here's the beautiful truth that Tom discovered. What defines us isn't the betrayal we suffer, but the grace with which we rebuild. Like a master craftsman seeing possibility in damaged wood, we can take our broken expectations and create something new. Perhaps smaller than we'd planned, but more precious for having survived the breaking. Your life's work, whether raising children or building furniture or teaching others, has value that can't be diminished by someone else's failure to see it. And sometimes, like Tom found with his brother Marcus, the most profound connections are forged in the workshop of shared pain, where we learn that some bonds, when tested, reveal themselves to be stronger than we ever imagined.